Hello everybody, welcome back. Thanks for tuning in again to the next episode in the series where we're just going to further our discussion on Airbnb's epoxy library. In the last episode, we converted our view holder to an epoxy model that is of type view binding Kotlin model. And if you've missed any of that, please go ahead and get caught up and then resume here because we are going to now convert our adapter over to the epoxy controller. So just kind of, I guess we could honestly just delete that for now. This is obviously going to freak out, but also we are going to, instead of extending RecyclerView.Adapter, we are going to extend our epoxy controller, and that's beautiful. So in here, we need to actually implement one function called build models. And there are a few things that no longer work, right? All of this get item count, on bind view holder, on create view holder are not part of this epoxy controller anymore, so we are just going to literally go ahead and cut those out. Now, we have this function here, before we go ahead and implement this, we have this function here, set data, to actually set the attractions that are inside of this epoxy controller. But instead of keeping this variable private, we're actually going to expose it to the public. And we are going to go ahead and just remove this function and do something instead. So if we call set in here, we are going to say field equals value, and then we are going to say request model build, which is essentially the same as notify dataset changed. We're also going to very quickly add in a is loading state here, and we will go ahead and do the same here. I'm going to say field equals value, and then if field, we say request model build, and then in here we're going to say is loading equals false. Okay, so a little bit going on here, but in Kotlin you can override the setter and getter on the particular variable so that you can kind of slightly customize the ability or what it ends up doing. So here in the is loading field, when this gets set, we go ahead and set field. So field is actually what is represented or what is loading represents, and value is what happens when you actually basically what gets passed in for when you're setting it. So when you say is loading equals false, you're assigning it. Basically set with value equals false is what's going to run. So then we're going to say field equals false, and then if field, we request model build. And so that is basically saying if true, we request the model build. So if we set something where it says, is loading equals true, traditionally after that, you're going to want to rebuild the UI because you want to show a little loading spinner, right? And so that's what the request model build is going to do. This is essentially the same thing as the notify dataset changed. To the RecyclerView.Adapter implementation. And so same idea here for the attractions array list. We're going to set the field. We are going to internally turn off is loading because it is no longer loading, and then we are going to request the model builds here. And so then after all of that, we can actually go ahead and very easily define the state of our UI based on the data that we have. So build models is what's going to end up running when the request model build is invoked, and that once Epoxy does its thing, it asks for the models and then it displays the models on the screen. So what we can very easily do here is we can say the first thing we're going to do is if is loading, we're going to say to do show loading state, and then we just want to return right from this function. We don't want to show anything else because we're clearly loading. Then let's say if attractions dot is empty, we're going to show our empty state, and then we're also going to return. Otherwise, we are going to say attractions dot for each. We're going to take our attractions epoxy model, which takes an attraction, it, and then the on-click listener, which is set in our constructor of this, it's called adapter, but we're going to change that, but the controller. And then there's a few things we need to do here to this model so that it actually gets injected on the screen. So we need to give it an ID, and the reason we need to do that is so that Epoxy can actually efficiently run its diffing and all of the stuff that it needs to do under the hood in order to you know, properly display everything on the screen or animate things away or you know, change any positions in the list when things are updated and in different positions, etc. So we will put the ID is going to be it.id, and remember it is attraction, so let's just rename that for right now just to make life a little easier. And then we call the add to this function. This is the controller that you need to add things to, and because we're inside the Epoxy controller, we are going to just go ahead and add it to ourselves essentially. So I'm just going to do this little guy here to make things, I don't know, a little easier to read. And then that's it. That's absolutely it. That's all we need to do. There's no, you know, on create view holder, on bind view holder. There's no get item count and we need to return this. No, it literally, Epoxy just asks you to override this function, the build models, and then you have free reign to do whatever you want in that location. So it makes it very easy for us to declare, you know, if we are in a loading state, we're going to show our loading state. So we're going to show a loading model. If we are in an empty state, we can just show our empty state. And then otherwise, we can just go ahead and loop through all our attractions, add them as an epoxy model, or attach all the attractions to an epoxy model, give it a unique ID, tell it to add to the controller, and then when this function returns, you know, the views will show up on screen. So I am going to right-click, refactor, rename. We're going to call this home fragment controller for epoxy controller, and then we're going to go ahead and take a look here. Yeah, so we have a couple things that we need to clean up at the fragment level. So we're going to leave this the same, right? The home controller, well, you know what, let's just call this epoxy controller. There's no reason to not, because there's only one. The home controller is still going to take this as a parameter, right? This is the callback for the on-click callback when one of the items in the list gets clicked, which we set the information to our view model, and then we go ahead and just navigate to the screen that will go ahead and display that particular one that was selected. And then traditionally we would call on the recycler view, you know, get the adapter and set it equal to some kind of adapter. And what we can do here, fortunately for epoxy, is we can call on the controller adapter, and this will actually return to you extends RecyclerView.Adapter. So under the hood, this all boils down to an adapter, right? It's just a fancy wrapper around it, but we can go ahead and fetch that adapter from our controller. However, I'm going to go ahead and do something else to make our lives a little bit easier and maybe a little bit cleaner and whatnot. Instead of using the Android X Recycler View widget Recycler View, we can actually use what's called the Epoxy Recycler View, which this functions exactly the same as I don't know what's going on here, it's freaking out, but it functions exactly the same as a recycler view, except it has a few added benefits. And when you're using, you know, the controller, you just can put this in synergy, or put the UI element in synergy with your the implementation controller. So I'm going to rename this to Epoxy Recycler View, just because out of habit, I spelled recycler wrong. And so then we're going to have a little bit of an issue here. So instead of recycler view again, we just need to call epoxy recycler view, and you can call set controller or set controller and build models. We're going to go ahead and just call set controller for now. But we pass in the controller, which is our epoxy controller. So instead of having to actually reference the controller dot adapter to get the RecyclerView adapter. The Epoxy Recycler View UI element is kind of a wrapper around the RecyclerView UI element, which allows you to directly set a controller on it and do a couple other fancy things around it to make your life a little easier. So as you can see here, the item decoration works as it should. It's again a wrapper around the RecyclerView, so all that stuff will be there. And then we removed our set data function to actually set the attractions, but instead we can call EpoxyController.Attractions. A little typecasting here that we needed to do just to clean things up and have it work, but now our repository returns an array list of attractions. Our live data is of an array list of attractions, again, just to go in with that synergy, and then we can just easily at the fragment level set EpoxyController.Attractions equals attractions. So at this point here, we have everything up and running. Did this come back to life? Not really. Yeah, interesting. Okay. So if we go ahead and stop that and rerun it, kind of wanted it to come back from there. Let's go ahead and give it a whirl. Let's see what it ends up looking like. All right, and pretty anticlimactic, wasn't it? Everything looks the same. You're like, Dom, what did we do? You did nothing. You just confused me completely, and there's no visible change here. You click on one, you go here, you go back, and like what the hell, dude? What did we just wait? Why did I just waste my time with this? You didn't waste your time. I can guarantee you that. And I guess we can get into it. Well, I guess we can get into it right now. But we can, very easily describe different states that we end up finding ourselves in, based on just the way that our data is laid out, right? So if we were to, in the very beginning of all of this, then we just need to implement our loading state. So again, let's just go in here and say, well, we're actually going to go ahead and just create inside of our epoxy, we will create a new file called loading EpoxyModel. Make that a class specific. Well, actually, no, we can't. Okay, so what we've done here, what I've gone ahead and done here is create a epoxy model for the loading state, created a layout file here that is very simple. I had to look it up to get the style here, but it is a Android X component called the content loading progress bar. We set it to be indeterminate only true, so it's one of those things that's just gonna like kind of, the tail is gonna like catch up to its head and just going to continue providing a little bit of a loading state. And so if we, not worry about that. And then also we have created inside our init function on the view model a 5-second delay here between when we actually call the function and then eventually start running or parsing the attractions. So considering we set loading to be true here, and then we don't set loading to be false until the attractions come in, there will be a 5-second period, or roughly 5-second period, of displaying a loading state. So let's just go ahead and run this again. And loading, loading, loading. and boom, we have all of our information in there. So yes, was it possible that we were able to do all of this inside of a recycler view? Of course. I mean, if Epoxy's doing it, we can do it, right? If Airbnb's figured out a way to, conveniently wrap everything you'd want to do into a library, like, it's very obvious that you can do, you can use the basic RecyclerView implementation, but the tremendous benefit that you get from the controller is just, I mean, it's just paramount. Again, this is just a simple example here, but it is just very, very, very simple to add views at your leisure and have basically the data describe how everything should work, how the UI should look based upon the state of the data. And then when a new state comes in, you just build your models again, rerun your logic, and then Epoxy manages the difference between the old UI and the new UI and animates between them and manages everything under the hood for you so conveniently. And at the end of the day, it is a much simpler approach, a much cleaner approach than having to override all those different callbacks in the recycler view, make sure you don't have the index out of bound exception, manage all this different logic to have a loading state, an empty state, the state where you have all your views. Here you literally just override one function based upon the data that you have, you tell it how you should build the screen, and boom, you're done. That's it. Maybe I'll try to think of a way that we can, find a little bit of a, yeah, you know what, we're gonna go ahead and in the next video, I'll figure out a way that we can go ahead and inject these little headers in different areas and kind of show you just how easy and simple certain things are to accomplish. And then, you hopefully will start to get a sense of how how it all comes together and why it's really that much better. So, thanks for sticking with me if you made it this far. I hope this is exciting and something new and different, and trust me, you're never going to want to go back to the RecyclerView implementation once you really get into the groove here with the epoxy controller and the models here. So I'm just going to go ahead and say that we converted RecyclerView.Adapter implementation to epoxy. Yeah. Then we're going to go ahead and push, and be all good. Yep, so clearly we can do a little bit more here with the empty state. We can do a little bit more with our header views that I'll try to figure something out in the meantime. And then, yeah, I will catch you in the next one. Thank you so much. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you are enjoying this series so far, and the tutorial and everything that is to come in the future, building off of this beautiful MVVM architecture with our epoxy, our Airbnb epoxy implementation for a recycler view. I mean, this stuff is definitely the way that apps are built. So I definitely will love to hear your feedback, and excited to continue to bring more valid and exciting content your way. So I'll catch you in the next one.